somehow involved in the leading at the policy level of that agency, and so was Mr. Charles Yearwood, who has since gone in to the wider Water Authority, but his specialization initially, or the focus of his work, was the drainage unit. And it's very important, if we do not know the history, if we don't tell the history, that achievements can be taken from you, other people given kudos for them, or just claim them arbitrarily. And you know, it was dropped so gently and fluffily to the ground, one would not have thought, one would almost have thought that it had some substance or accuracy in it, but indeed, sir, it had none. So I want to frame that policy framework to go on to make the point that the legislation, I want to spend some time actually looking at a few features or a few provisions of the legislation. But the whole concept of roofs to reefs and addressing issues of water, stormwater, drainage, and in fact, water reuse, because we cannot look at water in isolation. We are a water scarce country, not just water stress. Barbados is a water scarce country. The Caribbean is water scarce and water stressed. We are amongst the world's top water scarce and water stressed countries, in some instances ranking with sub-Saharan Africa. And if we are going to build our development for our people to ensure adequate supply of water and indeed build out our economy, we really have to understand how we address literally every drop of water and maximize it for social and economic use. I'm hearing about the construction, for instance, of new hotel product, new tourism product. I'm hearing about increasing tourist arrivals. You cannot do these things unless you have access to adequate water supply, first for your population, and then for those who come as visitors. So this subject is really located in a wider development argument, or in a wider conversation about development and or the importance of water to national development, and indeed to development globally. In Barbados, while people would think that our water rates are high, they are, by comparison with the international level and regional levels, sir, relatively low. And we enjoy a much higher level of access, with almost the entire population having pipe-borne water and potable water at their homes. So much higher level of access and a much higher level of quality water. Government is, and I wish to stress that Honorable Senator Cummings, the leader of government business, in her opening address, really placed significant emphasis on the level of personal responsibility. And I would like to revert to that and to emphasize, to reinforce, to repeat what she said. Barbadians' government is accepting its responsibility and acting on the policy and legislative aspects of water development, water use, and stormwater management. But a corollary to wastewater and managing waste and stormwater management is rested on personal responsibility. And she emphasized, quite rightly in my opinion, that we have, as Barbadians, a responsibility to consider what we do with our waste. There are restaurants and small businesses that dump their oils and waste into gutters and drains. There are people who slaughter animals and dump the offal into the gully or into drains. There are people who, when they finish with the old mattress, with all its body fluids and whatever else, drop it outside somebody's backyard. Yeah, yeah, no, sir. Just the thought of it. Just the thought of it, sir. It is graphic, sir, but really quite factual. And yes. There are those who do not even use the old bathtubs to grow some herbs or some kind of vegetable that they could make use of. They dump them somewhere, often by the side of the road where they can remain unsightly. They do the same with old fridges and old stoves. And then water collects in them, and they complain that there is an outbreak of dengue in the community. It can be traced directly back to our personal behavior. It creates then habitats for other vermin, rodents. When you look at vector-borne diseases, zoonoses, when you look at these ailments, you can see that social behavior is linked to the negatives that we see in our society. And then people will say, and what the government doing though? When really, the answer is, what are we as individuals and citizens doing in the protection of our own health, of our own lives, and of our open spaces? We do not know what chemicals are dumped in gullies or drains. When people who go to work in those spaces to clean behind those who have dumped, they are at risk. But not only are they at risk, the water system is at risk, because our water is water which seeps from the surface level into the underground and is then filtered toward the reservoirs. If dangerous chemicals are dumped, they can end up in our reservoirs. They can end up in the water system. So people who are being callous in respect of their practices and their behaviors are really putting a nation at risk. And we used to behave. We used to have, in my view, in years gone by, a higher sense of responsibility. We grew up, whether in urban or rural Barbados, seeing our foreparents, particularly our grandmothers, our grandparents, coming out, and they would clean the drain or the area in front of them. They cleaned around the house. They had a personal sense of responsibility for their surroundings and for the wider community. What the government is doing here also fits into its broader well-cleaning program. And you can see how then there is almost a tapestry, and I think that was the word used by the Honorable Senator Andwele Boyce, the entire tapestry of policy and programs fit together for the benefit and betterment of our society. I think, too, that the notion implicit now in this legislation or embedded in the legislation of road design within private developments or developments of a certain size is of particular importance. I live in a development that was privately designed, privately developed, and at 3 areas, there are 2 roads into the development. There are 3 areas where, as long as it rains, there is bad flooding in the road. That is a design problem. And very frequently, I do not think that there is the level of oversight on design techniques and the implications of the design on roadways in developments and the long-term implications of issues like drainage. I make the point that I said that I live in a development where there some areas are prone to flooding because of road design. In addition to that, sir, And I go back to the point of illegal dumping, and I think this is one of the areas that was omitted from the legislation, but has become a significant problem in terms of the blockage of gullies, the blockage of water courses, the blockage of drains and related areas. That very often on one of the roads to my house, even though it is less than a mile from the landfill, on any day one can find dead pigs, dead dogs, loads, what clearly were truckloads of coconut shells, household waste, personal garbage that clearly came in large commercial vehicles. This is not a single person who passed by and threw their personal garbage because it wasn't collected for 2 weeks out of the car window. These are commercial haulers who are being paid by householders or business enterprises to dispose of waste legally. They are taking the money, and rather than driving the additional mile or two to the landfill, depending on their point of origin, where there is no tipping fee, and materials that if the householder had left outside and called sanitation would have been picked up free of cost. And I emphasize this for the benefit of the public, members of the public who still do not seem to be aware that if you have bulky waste and you call SSA, it will be picked up free of cost. Now, I hear some people in some communities say that their garbage collectors will pick up their bulky waste, their grass and lawn cuttings, and take them away. In other communities, the garbage collectors point blank refuse to, and in other communities, they don't unless the householders give them what Bajans would call, sir, a little tra-la. What is the policy? There has to be a clear policy in relation to grass and other cuttings, because I'm putting these in here because very often householders, in the light of the uncertainty or demanded expenditure, will dump their cuttings again into drains, into gullies, into areas for disposal, not for proper disposal. I turn then, sir, and look at section 15. Section 15 prohibits construction over drains and wells and areas for taking stormwater. And this is a useful addition to the legislation because very often people design buildings, etc., particularly in housing areas where there is a lot of additional unapproved construction, and they block wells and other drainage areas. It happens in middle income areas too, sir, so I am not, and upper middle income areas, and commercial developments. So I am not just identifying housing areas. I'm saying that property owners and property occupiers, by reason of design or expansion of their properties, are in the habit of blocking drainage wells and drainage areas and water courses as they expand their properties. So adequate policing of this needs to take place, and it may well be that we have to add to the drainage unit an inspection unit in order to ensure that there is compliance with this and related legislation. Because often we have legislation, but the lack of compliance and the lack of policing frustrates the implementation and the proper functioning of the legislation. Section 15 also speaks to a $20,000 fine for blocking of drains which are on people's land. So these are public drains on private lands where you block them. It fines people for not clearing drains on their lands. Now I want to pause, sir, to make the point that very often, or carrot and stick methodologies for compelling behavior are common. With carrots, you offer something to induce or to catalyze the behavior that you want. With sticks, you impose a penalty, a fine, a punishment on the householders or property owners to get them to comply. The legislation has opted for the stick approach. But frankly, sir, I would have liked to see the carrot used. I would have liked to see an approach where we said to householders, when you clear drains, and this is where the inspection unit comes in or would come in, when you adequately clear drains, when you don't block, when you clean the areas by the government drains and you do what you're supposed to do, rather than imposing a fine for doing the wrong thing, that we will take X% off of your land tax, so that you offer a carrot rather than a stick. Because very often, people know they're not going to get caught, so they don't bother to do the right thing. And therefore, a carrot is a more effective methodology in creating the behavior that you would like to see than is the stick. And I thought that we perhaps missed an opportunity here for the use of carrots rather than sticks. I'm going for the penalty approach rather than the, what's the word I want? Thank you, rather than the incentive approach. That's exactly the word, sir. So incentives versus penalties, this is something that we ought to consider. Incentives rather than criminal fines. The legislation also allows, sir, for cost recovery by government where they are forced to expend money in situations where people block drains or have negative behavior, which creates flooding and stormwater management and drainage problems. And I think that this is a useful and good way of approaching it, because government gets the expense for the negative behavior of the private citizen, who demand that government gives them the best quality service and addresses their problems, the problems that they have created, and they don't think that they bear any responsibility, behavioral or financial, in addressing this challenge. And therefore, I'm glad to see that the legislation contemplates and provides for cost recovery where government expends money to address problems that are created by private or commercial entities. At section 16, there is provision for materials collected in that are dumped in a gully or water course or drainage area or drain, where that material is salvageable, to be kept at a government depot. I see for up to 28 days. So if your material, if you were storing construction material, lumber or something, because sometimes people store these things outside their house, sir, and I want to say, in relation to the people who dump and dispose, one of the bugbears for me is the wayside mechanics. I do not know how it can be good advertisement for you, for every car that ever broke down and never left your place, to be parked up outside of your house for 10 years. And more, all over private developments, all over middle-income developments, all over working, all over the place. You have to navigate some maze to get. I won't carry my car by nobody who got all them old cars at that place, because it suggests to me that their rate of success really is not very high. But people go to them. People go to them, and that is a matter for them. But wayside mechanics, and we like to talk about small business, entrepreneurs, and the small black man, but there has to be some kind of acceptable behavior and standard imposed on them. Many of them are not registered, they're not paying taxes, they don't pay NIS, etc., and they create health hazards in the center of communities. There are some places, sir, where you know the roadsides are virtually blocked by these people's enterprises. Garbage trucks cannot get through. Only one lane of vehicle can pass. Ambulances can't get through. A lot of them are using toxic chemicals, nauseous fumes within communities, and there are schools. There's no restraint at all. And I think that all of this really could have been brought under this legislation, and that we do need to take firm steps to address this kind of problem. I know that government has started to establish centers which small businesses can go and set up mechanic shops and all of the fridge repair and stove repair and all of those other things which tend to be done in the garage alongside the house, in the open pasture next door, all the spray painting and bodywork men, etc., etc. Government is establishing facilities for these people, and that is to be commended, but I think that there also needs to be some kind of regulatory framework commensurate with the establishment of facilities. I was talking then about Section 16 and the fact that if you dump in a particular area and the material is salvageable, then that can be collected and kept at a depot. The legislation says for up to 28 days. You have 28 days to claim it. Now, sir, this to me presents very serious problems which legislation does not cover. The first thing is, how do you identify an owner? How is an owner to be identified? You pick up a load of lumber and I turn up and say, that's mine. How do you ascertain that it is mine or not? Well, I lost the bill. I had it out there for about 3 years now. I didn't know you was coming for it. Because you're going to hear a lot of that. So how do you establish ownership? One. Two, how do you, because I don't know that the people who do these collections are going to be trained in any way. How do you inventory what is collected, from where it is collected, and when you take it to the depot, is it stocked, packed in such a way that you can identify this was load number 43 from vehicle number C to X5 on such and such a day from such and such a place, and you do not mix that load with another load for somebody to say, well, only part of that is mine, or all belong to me, when in fact it doesn't. So this whole business of establishing ownership, storage in the depot, allowing people to claim it, etc., is going to become problematic. But more than that, you know, sir, we would see government start a project to repair a road. They start on the road going off for about 2 weeks, then the bill of hut, sir. Well, as the bill of hut, you're in trouble because it has moved from a 2-week or a monthly program, a month-long program, to a 6-month program. And if it is a 6-month program, 18 months later, the hut gonna be there, and the watchman gonna be sleeping in it when the night comes. So, sir, that is my concern here now. Sir, I know that sometimes I use humor to deliver serious points, and that people don't think that you can deliver serious points humorously. I disagree. That has become an entrenched part of our modus operandi in relation to government projects. And I'm suggesting here that when these things are stored in the depot, nobody is really going to look back at them. Are people going to start treating it as if it is government's property? When the depot gets full, how then, what is to happen? Because the legislation does not tell us what is to happen to those things after 28 days. Do you have another, let's say another 12 days to catalog and sell them? Do you sell them by public auction? Does the government engineer auction them? Who values? Who attaches a dollar value to the things that are collected, to the things that are in the depot, to what you're likely to get on a sale, and where does the money go if a sale takes place? No, none of this is treated to in the legislation, but I think that it is an important omission which really needs to be addressed, because I am now beginning to be fearful that these things will be collected from gullies and drains and water courses and so on, and just taken and placed in depots, or other storage facilities may even have to be built to accommodate them, and there they will remain until the second coming of Jesus, sir, because there will be no date set for getting them out of these places, or for indeed cost recovery to take place. And the legislation, so moving again, I've dealt with my concerns about Section 16, which I think in essence does have some merit, but I think it doesn't go far enough, and I've indicated it doesn't go far enough, and I have indicated. I see only Senator Lisa pick that up, and the President, well, yes, doesn't go far enough. And Freudian slip. And I wanted to draw attention to those. So I'm now moving to another component of the legislation, which is that the legislation, and I'm glad to see this, provides persons who are adversely affected by government's actions with a right of remedy, with a right of compensation, and with the opportunity to go to arbitration if they are not entirely satisfied. So when these things are seized, not only can they be taken, and I think they clearly have to be cataloged and valued, and I don't see that in the legislation, but it is very, very critical, or you're going to have serious disputes with members of the public over what was collected, quantity and value, and in this case, where government damages somebody's property in trying to clear a water course or a drainage area or a storm drain or anything of that sort, they must compensate the individual. And like I said, they have a right of recourse, and they can go to arbitration if they are not satisfied. Mr. President, I know that you've signaled to me that I have about 2 minutes left. And in that case, I come to closure by saying I think that this is really a very good, necessary piece of legislation, which I'm happy to support. I would like to think that in a future iteration, some of the elements to which I have just spoken will be included, because in my view, they are important, or they were significant, they are important, and there were significant omissions. I think that we have here provided in relation to for addressing threats to health, threats to potable water, threats to crops, threats to land, threats to those who attempt to do removal, that the legislation addresses all of those things, for which I'm grateful. I think, however, sir, that we need to contemplate this in the context of a national water use and water management policy, for which I am calling. We cannot be a water scarce or water stressed country without really considering every drop of water, from roof, from falling to flow to final resting place. And in that regard, our national water use a management policy will not only deal with storm water, but potable water, the storage of water, water reuse, the fact that every citizen really should have a tank on every single house in Barbados, irrespective of the kind of house, chattel or of concrete construction, and that this water, a national water policy and plan really would serve us in good stead in this era of the Anthropocene and its impact with regard to climate change. With that, sir, I close my remarks, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Your Honor, Senator Thompson. Senator the Honorable Lyndall Nurse.
Thank you, Mr. President. I shan't be very long, but I thought I should lend my voice to this debate because I think it's a very important piece of legislation. And I think we all, from listening to all of the speeches today, it is obviously one that all the speakers seem committed to support. And this is important because we are debating storm water management or flood. I believe it's flood, stormwater management. But yet, you know, we know Barbados as a to be a water scarce country. And so there's, in a way, a little paradox here that we have to talk about managing our flood water, but yet we don't even have that capacity to be able to adequately supply our needs for potable water and so on. So, to me, when we talk about management, this stormwater management, we must see it in the context of not only managing floods, but also our overall water, which must be available for us to use in our daily living. And so I see this whole issue of management, not only to include the fact that we need to improve our drainage systems, not only the fact that we need to be able to have infrastructure in place to be able to handle a certain volumes of storm waters when they happen. But I see it as being important in terms of making sure that we also put measures in place to be able to capture as much of this storm water as possible for use. And not only that, but be able to manage that water such that we look at the other issues which affect the waters collected. For example, we know that when you have runoff from the fields and so on, chemicals are collected in the water and so on, and that in itself can go towards contaminating our water supply system. So to me, it has to be an overall holistic and integrated system. Now, some of these issues relating to, of course, management of chemicals and pesticides and so on will probably be located in other acts, maybe under agriculture or whatever. But the point is that we need to be able to recognize that these are all issues which need to be mitigated as well, and which form a very important part of the overall management of the systems. And so the legislation is timed. Actually, when I looked, when I was reading through the legislation, it struck me that, you know, this is really a new piece of legislation. And it's only when I got to the end and under repeal, I recognized that there was something, there was a flood. I believe it's called the Prevention of Floods Act. There was something there before. And when I sort of started to look at to see what that Prevention of Floods Act was all about, it turns out that it was a piece of legislation that was in place probably like 50 or 60 years ago. And while, you know, the little amendments would have been made to that legislation from time to time, it really was not, we have legislation which really is not right now suitable for the type of development, for the type of issues relating to climate change and so on, which would be necessary in this day and age. So in that regard, it is timely. And I congratulate the ministry. I believe it's the Ministry of Communications and Works that will probably be the will probably be overseeing this legislation. So I congratulate all of the persons in that ministry who would have worked in terms of bringing this bill into the modern world. And, you know, I've heard some comments during the course of the day about, for example, some of the fines which can be chargeable for infractions of this legislation. And I really have nothing against the size of the fines, because I think it is time that we, as Barbadians, recognize that things like indiscriminate dumping, people we know who still go and in the dead of the night quite happy to dump the garbage, and I think Senator Thompson made the point about the old beds and the fridges and whatever else into the gullies, and continue to create great harm for everyone. And so I have no difficulty with the level of fines, and in fact, as far as I'm concerned, they could have been higher. Because we have to get our Barbadian communities out of these habits that seem to have been cultivated over time. And we have to recognize that this country is for all of us, and we all have to play a part in making sure that we protect it. And so in this regard, I am also happy to see that the legislation has brought to the fore and put some onus on individuals as well as business and commercial properties to making sure that drainage, which is on their properties, recognize that they have an onus to be able to make sure that it is those drainage systems are kept clean and tidy. The only thing I would say is that sometimes the government, the ministry will come along and they will sink a well on someone's, I guess there's some arrangement or something on someone's property. So they could end up now with themselves, government having put in the system, but then under the law, then they are required to keep it clean. Unless, of course, there's some compulsory acquisition or something that takes part. But other than that, I see, for example, that I would have suggested that what could have been done is that, for example, if there's an onus on the landowner to make sure that that drainage system is properly maintained, perhaps there could be some tax relief, let's say, where you could, like, for example, in your house, where you could claim insurance, or you could claim some level of maintenance, for example, to make on your tax. Perhaps this could have been something which you can claim for, and so you help to encourage landowners with these systems to be able to, make sure that they are kept clean, as is the intention of the legislation. But I go further. It's not only the private and enterprises and individuals, but government itself has a responsibility to see that this maintenance of the system is in place. Because, and I see in the bill that it says the state is subject to this act. So when we see, for example, on a day-to-day basis that the ministry or the drainage division or whoever is cleaning drains and they take all the garbage and the stuff out and they dump it on the side of the road, and it's left there for 2 or 3 weeks before it is collected, that creates another issue, because if you have in the interim another flood or some rain or something which comes out and it washes a lot of the material right back into the drain, and so you're back at square one. And so I'm saying that part of this management, which I am stressing on, must see that when you clean drains, that the debris is removed in a timely manner. I see, for example, you see people, we still have persons along the streets who weed the streets. They weed and they go along and they pile up the cuttings and so on in little piles as they go along. Again, sometimes they are left for days or weeks before some other part of the ministry who is responsible for the collection comes along to clean it. And in the interim, again, you can have a situation where what has just been cleaned up can find itself back in fact, sometimes, and I can speak to this because I've had it in my street, where, a couple of weeks ago we had people weeding and then they suddenly disappeared. But the debris is still there. And of course the rains are now coming in, and, so what I'm saying is management of all of these, of these issues must see to it that government is also doing what is necessary, not only in terms as a regulator, but where in the case of the various ministries responsible for doing whatever, I don't know if it's the Ministry of the Environment or whoever, but that what they're doing is done in an efficient and timely manner. And so, Mr. President, I just want to also make the point that in the case of designation of flood zones, perhaps the chief technical officer who advises the minister, I think one of the things that should be an integral part of that system is having consultations. These days we call them town halls or whatever. But having consultations with the local people in the community. Because very often the technocrats go in and they design systems, probably without necessarily consulting the local people who have the local knowledge of what the issues are, where the flood waters are emanating from. and where they're accumulating and so on. And then you go and put in systems which are inefficient or ineffective in terms of solving the issues which you tend to, which you intended to solve in first place. And so I would suggest that that level of consultation, using that local knowledge, would be useful in terms of making sure that we are more effective in placing our drainage systems over the various communities. And so I want to commend this legislation. I certainly support it. And I wish that the communication, the level of communication would be such as that we will be able to sensitize our various communities of the importance of this legislation, and that we can get all of Barbados to be involved in solving these issues. And with those few words, Mr. President, I'm obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Nurse. Senator Cummings, please wrap up.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to begin my wrap-up of this particular measure by expressing appreciation to all of the honourable senators who have spoken on the resolution, and to attempt just for a few moments to respond to as many of the queries that were raised as I can. Now, I want to perhaps open my comments by making the point that I am not an engineer. I don't know that any of us in this room are engineers, so I am not going to get into the business of attempting to respond to how the Mill and Pave program can pave roads and how it should be done and what should not be done in terms of the gradient. But I can tell you that the technical officers who are engineers and design engineers in particular in the Ministry of Transport and Works, I will make sure that I will share with my colleague minister the recommendations or some of the concerns that have been raised in terms of the gradient, and then they can provide appropriate responses based on technical guidance and technical expertise. And the additional measure issue that was raised specifically about the drainage systems being put back in once the grills are done in the center of the road, I will pass those on to the Honourable Minister. Equally so, the question of resilience, I want to appreciate the Honourable Senator who spoke about the issue of resilience being a part of the conversation, because that is very much a part of the government's agenda overall, and most certainly when we're talking about issues that are climate related, we are very much talking about in building resilience and reducing vulnerability in our planning processes. The well cleaning program that was mentioned earlier about attempting to make sure that it was effective, there has been an active well cleaning program, certainly across the government infrastructure, government institutions, and there has been a call for, in particular, private plantation landowners to take responsibility in collaboration with the inspectors for cleaning the wells that are on their property, in particular, those that are in low-lying areas or in flood-prone areas, or even in those areas as mentioned in St. John, and I certainly am one of the persons affected by what happens at Bowmanston in St. John when it rains. We want to be able to see the engagement. We expect that cleaning of plantations by private landowners would also be taking place specific to wells. On Cuscus Grass, Senator King did respond because there is a program under the Ministry of Environment that has been rolled out. And there is also a program for gullies, also under the Ministry of Environment, for the cleaning of gullies. And they have already commenced in advance of the hurricane season, the clearing of gullies, the clearing of culverts, certainly across St. George. You can see sometimes the big heavy excavating equipment clearing areas that people have built obstructionist structures in the pathway of the waterways, and the gullies are being cleared by the Ministry of Transport and Works. Now, there was a query raised, I believe it was by Senator Maynard, about the differential between the fines for persons who are working on the job and are being obstructed in the course of doing their duties, and those persons who are constructing illegal infrastructure in waterways and so on. No, we travel all the time, and there is a no tolerance policy. You can do all kinds of things and you will have a penalty associated with it, but there is a no tolerance policy for interfering with a person who, in the exercise of their duties and responsibilities, you cause them harm. The difference between what people do in terms of infrastructure and how they treat individuals and professionals and workers on the job in the course of their duty is by definition a human capital matter, a worker protection matter, and so therefore people have to be guaranteed safety at work. They cannot be obstructed, assaulted, interfered with in the course of the execution of their duties, and so that is the rationale I would expect for prioritizing that. In addition to the comments that I've referred to so far, I want to thank Senator Boyce for his comments, which incorporated issues relating to the Bridgetown Initiative, climate financing, the debt swap. Those are the issues that are all wrapped up in what we have described, and certainly in my opening comments, a suite of interventions, which I spoke about as policy, human capacity, investment in infrastructure, and now legislative reform. I believe I'd given a comprehensive overview of the original 1951 Prevention of Floods Act. I went into in great detail the amendments that were made, the last major amendments to the Prevention of Floods Act in 1998, and the previous major amendments to the Prevention of Floods Act in 1996. I did so in my opening comments, and I believe that Senator Nurse may have missed that comprehensive outline of the previous legislation and the rationale for this new and more expansive and more inclusive legislation. So with those few words, Mr. President, I want to thank all of the honorable senators who have spoken on this legislation, and I want to express appreciation also on behalf of the Ministry of Transport and Works for your support for the legislation. And Senator Thompson, certainly I hope that the public of Barbados has heard your and my recommendations and our pleas to the public of Barbados on the issue of dumping indiscriminately and the impact it has on our drainage infrastructure. And you have taken it even further away from flooding and drainage infrastructure to speak about the fact that we sometimes self-create some of the issues around mosquito-borne illnesses and some of the discomfort that we are experiencing in our communities. And of course, to end, Mr. President, on the balance of rights and responsibilities, the government can make the investment in crafting policies, as we have done. The government can make the investment in investing in infrastructure, as we have done and are doing. The government can legislate, as we have done and we are doing. But there has to be a concomitant responsibility taken on average citizens, Barbadians like me and like you, to ensure that we keep our surroundings clean, that we comply with the provisions of the law, that we do not allow our own personal activities to be done illegally, and then those activities become a bother and a nuisance to the community and an expense on the government. And so therefore, I am urging the public, when they hear these comments that we are making today in the Senate, that they understand that as the government tries to work with the public, that we are really calling on the public to work hand in hand with each other and with the government. And with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill is now read a second time.
Thank you, Senator Cummings. The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The next ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honour do not leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do not leave the chair and the Honourable the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. Will those honourable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The next ayes have it.
The Honourable Senate is now in committee.
Madam Chairman, permission to call the clauses in parts, please.
Permission granted.
Part 1, clauses 1 through 4.
Madam Deputy Chairman, I beg to move that the sections Part 1, sections 1 through 4 do not stand part.
The question is that Part 1, sections 1 through 4 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 2, clauses 5 through to 11.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 2, clauses 5 through 11 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 2, clauses 5 through 11 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 3, clauses 12 through 16.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 3, clauses 12 through 16 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 3, clauses 12 through 16 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 4, clauses 17 and 18.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 4, clauses 17 and 18 do now stand part.
Question is that Part 4, clauses 17 and 18 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 5, clauses 19 through to 22.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 5, clauses 19 through 22 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 5, clauses 19 through 22 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 6, clauses 23 through to 28.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 6, clauses 23 to 28 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 6, clauses 23 to 28 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 7, clauses 29 to 36.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 7, clauses 29 through 36 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 7, clauses 29 through 36 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move the schedule be the schedule to the bill.
The question is that the schedule be now the schedule to the bill. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
The chairman has reported the pass of one bill in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move this bill now be read a third time.
Question is that this bill be read a third time. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Stormwater Management Act of 2025.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Storm Management Act 2025. Will those honorable senators in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. Voting the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Mr. President, order number 9. In the name of the Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Insurance Amendment Bill 2025.
Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. This is a short bill, but it is intended to treat to the matters of regulation of the insurance sector. You have before you, it is at order number 9 on the order paper. It is an act that was debated in the other place about 2+ weeks ago. And this particular bill is meant to make some amendments to the way in which the institution we know as the Financial Services Commission treats to the insurance sector. The Act, in its introduction, it calls itself an Act to amend the Insurance Act, Cap 310, to enhance statutory fund enhancements and to make provision for a risk-based capital and insolvency regime. And it makes a number of amendments in several sections of the legislation. Section 1, obviously, is being changed as an amendment. It is an amendment at Section 12 of the legislation, where you are deleting paragraph B, substituting it with the following language, which reads, "A company is insolvent in terms determined by the Commission." And you are also making a further amendment by deleting and replacing the paragraph which reads, the company has established and maintained a statutory fund in the manner determined by the Commission. The next amendment is in Section 15, the following one is in Section 25, and they speak specifically with the establishment and maintenance of statutory funds by way of legislation. And then it goes into specifics where you're talking about dividend, impairing capital, the margin of insolvency. Now, Mr. President, this is what the legislation in terms of the amendments will treat to, but I want to get into the why and the what in my presentation. Mr. President, I remember some time ago, I believe in the first year that I joined the Ministry of Energy and Business, there was an Office of Insolvency, public insolvency, that at the time sat under the Ministry of Energy and Business. And the supervisor of insolvency reported into that ministry. Since then, Mr. President, a decision was made to anchor the work of the Office of the Supervisor of Insolvency in the Ministry of Finance, largely because the supervisory institutions that govern the way in which that office ran really were best vested in the Ministry of Finance. Matters relating to how capital structures and capital markets were managed, matters relating to fiscal affairs more broadly, fell within the remit of the Ministry of Finance, and specifically as it relates to this piece of legislation, the functioning of the Financial Services Commission fell under the Ministry of Finance. And so matters covered in this piece of legislation as amended here will fall under the remit of the FSC, as I will call it going forward, but the Financial Services Commission is the long term. Now, there are 3 things that we're attempting to treat with here in this legislation. One, the first and the principal action that is attempted by this legislation is to transition into a risk-based management system. And so the insurance amendment before you is to allow for the insurance sector to be in a position where it moves from functioning in a static way, in a way that then becomes more intuitive. I am certain, Mr. President, that if I were to say to the average small business in this country that the same rules and regulations governing large multi-million-dollar corporations are also as applicable to them in all the same ways, that they would say, but it is too onerous. It doesn't make any sense. But I don't have all of the resources that big companies have to be able to do some of the things that they do. And so it is important for us not to have a one-size-fits-all approach as it relates to business generically. And that's no different than in insurance. What is being proposed in a risk-based system is a different model that allows for the Financial Services Commission specifically to then start first and foremost under a risk-based management system with risk identification. Identify what the risks are of a given action and a given activity. Risk assessment then becomes the second step, assessing what to do about the initial risk that you have identified. Risk control measures, then looking at how you are going to mitigate against those risks. And then fourthly and finally, looking at ensuring that continuous monitoring and review is taking place that would allow for the specific risk that was identified in the first place, because as is the nature of business, and in the case insurance of this legislation, things do not remain the same all the time. And so the FSC is proposing now to move into this risk-based supervised supervision, which will allow for a number of considerations. First, what is the nature of the insurer's business? What are you into? What are the risks arising from that business? Remember, I did start out by saying that there are four main areas that we will be looking at, Mr. President, and the first one looks at risk identification. So the first thing is, what's your business? What are you doing? What are the risks from that business? What are the steps taken by you, the insurer, to mitigate those risks? What is the likelihood of risk being realized despite that? So despite your best efforts, despite your investment in infrastructure, despite your investment in policy and monitoring, despite your investment in capital and supervisory support, what are the risks that you are likely to still face? And then finally, what is the potential impact if the worst case scenario happens? And that's really where the risk-based management system is going. The current legislation, CAP 310, in its current form, does not provide for a risk-based management system. It doesn't cover that. It is a static piece of legislation that attempts to have a one-size-fits-all approach, and it treats to the work of the Financial Services Commission in a way that does not allow it to be as responsive to the dynamism of the financial services sector, specifically the insurance sector. As it relates then to the second component, which is statutory funds, it has a number of limitations, and those limitations are that it has prescriptive requirements for statutory funds, which include very specific and detailed restrictions. It talks about the kinds of asset types in which statutory funds may be invested. It talks about the jurisdictions or territories from which some assets may originate, and it sets criteria for individual types of assets. Now, what the FSC, through the Ministry of Finance and through this legislation in turn, is attempting to do is to collide now with where the international community has gone and where industry has gone globally in this regard. Mr. President, you sit in another space, particularly as it relates to the Financial Action Task Force, FATF. And together with your office, the Office of the Attorney General, the Ministry of Finance, and my own ministry, responsible for business, we deal with the OECD, the Forum for Harmful Tax Practices, and risk-based mitigation and risk-based management are all inbuilt into all of these processes. There is a sense of attempting to get in front of many of these issues to prevent use of crime, to prevent the illicit transfer of the proceeds of crime, to prevent money laundering, to prevent terrorism, to prevent all kinds of financial related crimes by using a risk-based system. And so that is where this legislation equally positions the Financial Services Commission. Now, if I were to go into what the recommendations are globally, the FATF itself has encouraged countries to move well beyond what they describe as a tick box approach. And so what they have urged is that in monitoring the private sector's efforts to address these issues of financial services, that it is important that supervisors then address the full spectrum of risks and focus the resources in institutions where risks are highest. And so that is what the legislation is hoping to be able to introduce as part of a regulatory reform for the risk-based system approach in the financial services sector under the management of the Financial Services Commission. Now, when I was preparing for this debate and we started to look at what the international community was saying and what the industrial associations were saying, across the board, there was a general consensus that RBS, risk-based supervisory management, is a forward-looking approach and tends to be far more flexible, far more intuitive, and makes the industry far more dynamic because you're able to respond to risks as they change. We, Mr. President, for example, had a scenario where we have been dealing with different types of risks at different times in the country. And what I mean when I say different types of risks at different times in the country, Mr. President, at different times, once upon a time, you have thought we had to deal with hurricanes, once upon a time. Now, we're dealing with more intense hurricanes or faster hurricanes. That's a different kind of risk that you have to mitigate for. Once upon a time, you didn't account for storm surge from a hurricane you didn't have. You have to mitigate for that. Once upon a time, who would have thought that you had to mitigate for the risk of a volcano, which you don't have? And so risk has evolved, and risk assessments have evolved, and you have to be in a position to ensure for those risks and to look at the capital base of a given institution, given in this instance, a given insurance company, to be able to protect the industry moving forward. So the proposed amendments are meant to bring the Commission's regulatory framework in alignment with internationally accepted standards and best practices for supervision. This is against the backbone of Barbados' own regulatory framework, and we're being assessed for that framework, as I've mentioned, in multiple fora and also at the industry level, and the changes are needed to allow for the industry and the FSC to address the evolving economic conditions facing the insurance industry quickly, efficiently, and flexibly. In closing, Mr. President, because I don't want to, as I said at the beginning of my comments before I went into the legislation, this is a short amendment, but certainly in the international business space, Barbados remains one of the top jurisdictions in the world, in particular for captive insurance, for the captive insurance industry. There's a broad insurance industry, yes, but within the insurance segment, there's a subsector, which is captives. Barbados remains one of the top countries in the top 10 in the world for captives. And if we are to keep the existing business that we have, if we are to attract new business into the jurisdiction, and in so doing, attract corporation taxes, which then have a run-on effect and a benefit directly to Barbadians, because it is the accumulation of businesses function in Barbados. It is the attraction of businesses coming to domicile in Barbados, businesses paying taxes in Barbados, in particular corporation taxes, high net worth companies like these ones, that then allow the government to be able to earn the revenue to invest in social services, to invest in education, to invest in healthcare, to invest, Mr. President, in people. And so changing and updating and reforming our regulatory regime in a way that allows Barbados then to be an attractive jurisdiction to the insurance industry, including, but not limited to, the captive insurance industry, is a part of the development priority for Barbados, the development trajectory of Barbados, and it is on this basis that these amendments to bring Barbados into alignment with international best practice standards and the fluidity of those standards, that this legislation is before this honorable chamber. And with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Thank you very much, Senator Cummings. Any speakers? Senator Walters.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for the opportunity to share a few comments as well on these amendments to the Insurance Act, Cap 310. Interestingly enough, the leader of government business focused more on the international business side of the Act and the implications of strengthening our regulation in Barbados. But I think it also has implications on how we do business here as regular citizens, because we have insurance policies, we invest in insurance instruments, etc. And we should be protected as well as it relates to stronger regulation, and so that our investments, our funds that we put in to these insurance companies are well protected and have adequate oversight. So again, like the previous bill, there's no disagreement with what is being proposed in the amendments. Just a few questions and concerns that I will raise on some of the amendments in the bill. On the question of actuarial certification, sign off annually by an independent actuary, I would believe that it would be better served to